everyone is kind of in this Zoom room with me. And then I'll kind of kick back and talk for maybe like 10, 15 minutes about some of my experiences around research and some of my experiences around entrepreneurship and why I actually think they're the same thing. So I'm Stephen. I am the co-founder of Lumiere, which is an ed tech company that helps students all over the world engage in world-class research. I started Lumiere as a PhD student at Harvard Business School. Before then, I worked for a few years for McKinsey & Company, which is like this big consulting company. I worked in the US and in China, and I also worked in Vietnam on this startup university. So like the Ashoka of Vietnam, if you guys will, but called Fulbright University of Vietnam, the very first liberal arts university in Vietnam. So I worked on the strategy for that university. And then I was an undergraduate at Harvard where I studied statistics. But I will say more about kind of my background and why I care so much about research and about entrepreneurship a little bit later. Maybe if you guys would maybe go around, introduce yourself. Where are you? I think you guys probably all located, not too far away, but where are you studying, and what interests you about either business or research? So, anybody want to kick off?
Great, Stephen. Thank you. So I'm Uddhav. So I'm the founder of Business Casa, and my fellow members are also present with me. So most of us are based out of India in Calcutta. Are you aware of Calcutta?
Of course, yeah, of course.
Yeah, so we are based out of Calcutta, and Harshil, our members, is from Bangkok. So like we have diversity.
Great. Okay, Harshil, like coming in for the diversity. Good.
So like we all are in the 12th grade right now. So like some of us are in the Indian board, which is like the ICSE, and some of us are in the IB International Baccalaureate. And apart from that, all of us are, wannabe entrepreneurs, and in future you want to make change and do something for them, for humanity and progress basically. So rest of you, if you want to add on.
Yeah, I would love if everyone could just quickly go around, maybe just say something quick about themselves, if that would be okay. I'm coming from...
Hello, Stephen.
Hello.
I'm Keshav. I worked along with Uddhav since October in this, helping him establish this organization. And before that, he was praising you a lot, and he told us a lot of good things about you. And it's so nice to meet you here in the meeting.
That's great. Thank you. Great. Maybe just everyone else could just say quickly name and then kind of why, what about business or research they may be interested in.
Harshil and Ashmit, you guys can.
All right, I'll go first. Yeah. So hi, Stephen. My name is Harshil, and I'm based from Jaipur, but I do live in Bangkok. So the reason why business and this field inspires me is because the only hobby that I plan on having in the future is earning money. So, and the area of research which I am keen on, which I'm always leaning towards, is economics specifically. And that's why when I heard about you, I read your profile on the Harvard website and everything. So I was really excited to have this session because I'm also working on a research paper currently. So I wanted some tips and things from you.
Awesome. Great.
Stephen, I'm Ashmat. I was also working for this organization since October, as I could recollect, with Uddhav, Keshav, and Nihal. And then we began our work. We started the team. The team thing came in. Harshil joined us, Harishi joined us, Bhavesh joined us, and many others who are not here. So I'm also from Calcutta, and I'm currently in class 12.
Great. Amazing. Arushi and Nehal, would you guys be up to say a little about yourselves?
Hi, I'm Nehal, and like Uddhav said, I'm based from Calcutta as well. And my field of interest is mostly economics and business.
Great.
And I've been working with Uddhav and the others since October. Thank you.
Amazing. Arushi, what about you?
Hey, I'm Arushi. Even I'm working with these guys since like October, November. It's been great working with them.
Great. Okay, excellent. And Bhavesh, I don't know if you're there or not. You're kind of in the darkness. If not, I can just move forward.
Hi, actually, I won't be able to turn on my video right now. I'm somewhere where it's prohibited. So I'll just introduce myself. I'm Bhavesh. I'm based in Calcutta and I'm with Business Casa since October. And my key interests are in business and economics.
Great. Excellent. Okay. Perfect. Well, so let me start by telling you guys a little bit about my family and why I always thought I would be a researcher, and then how I realized that research and entrepreneurship are actually one and the same thing. So they're very similar. So my context is that the research has affected my family's life for generations. So my great grandfather, this guy Fritz Kahn, I'll give you guys a quick little visual actually, so you guys can look at it. Oh, can I screen share? What up?
Yeah, sure.
If not, it's okay. Excellent.
Oh,
So my grandfather, whose great grandfather's pictured here, his name is Fritz Kahn. He was a really famous writer and researcher in Germany in the 1920s and 30s. He wrote about the human body and was a prominent publisher and author, kind of a Toolgewande, if you will, of Germany in the 20s and 30s. But Fritz had one issue in his life that was a big issue in the 20s and 30s in Germany, and that he was Jewish. And so, as you guys probably know, in the 20s and 30s, Jews in Germany faced an increasing amount of persecution leading up to the mass extermination of Jews in the Holocaust. And for my great grandfather, he little by little started losing his own privileges. At one point, all of his books and his drawings, which he was famous for, were taken from him and actually given a German author's name. So he was forgotten for 20, 30 years. So he tried to escape from Germany. He got out of Germany actually because his friend, who was a fellow researcher and friend in Berlin, Albert Einstein, wrote him a letter to the U.S. Embassy to help him emigrate to the United States. So that's why I'm American and not German today. So Albert Einstein helped my great grandfather escape. But his son, who was really similar to the age of you guys, so like 12th grade, 17, 18, had always wanted to then go on and become a researcher himself. But his family lost everything when he immigrated to the U.S. And so when he eventually came to the U.S. And so my grandfather always felt like he never achieved his potential. He always felt like his father Fritz, who'd been this famous researcher and very successful, in kind of his own business way, if you will, by being this prominent author and ran this large team of artists who would create these infographics for him. He always felt like he never achieved his dad's potential because he never got to go to college because his family lost everything during the Holocaust. And so my dad grew up really poor. My dad grew up in Hawaii for much of his life. He worked at a pineapple plantation. So my dad picked pineapples to pay throughout junior high and high school. And when he was, again, about your guys' age, a little bit older, he found out that his dad had passed away quite suddenly. And so my dad, who had never been a good kid in school, like there's no way he would have been part of Business Casa. Like you guys would have kicked him out of the club immediately. He decided that he wanted to kind of live through his dad's memory. And one of the ways that his dad had never gotten to achieve his full potential was in doing research. So my dad started doing research as kind of psychology department. He fell in love with it, eventually went on to get a PhD, and then became a professor. He's actually a business school professor. And so I grew up with a very different experience than that of my grandfather. I grew up maybe in a more similar condition to my great grandfather, where I had, this really nice professor as a dad, loved research, very nerdy. We talked about like psychology over the dinner table. And eventually I got into Harvard College as a student. And one of the most important experiences that I had was working at Harvard Business School, which I just fell in love with. I just love this institution. I spent a summer there when I was at Harvard. And I met this guy, David, who became this mentor of mine, David Garvin, who was a professor there. And so I always felt like, okay, I'm going to go become a researcher because my father's a researcher. My grandfather was a researcher. My great-great-grandfather was a researcher. And my closest mentor, David Garvin, was also a researcher. And so I said that, okay, I'm going to go do that. And spent a few years working and then applied to these PhD programs, got to Harvard Business School. But one thing that always nagged at me was I also found that I was really interested in entrepreneurship. And which is I always found kind of curious, like, why was I interested in entrepreneurship? I started, maybe similar to business class in college, I started this organization called the Franklin Fellowship, which is this student group, which is kind of like starting a company, except, you don't make any money. So sorry guys, unlike our friend in Thailand, who's going to be making all the money, it's just a student group to make any money. But I found myself, I really enjoyed this process of building something. And it always confused me. Why was it that I was so attracted to entrepreneurship and to research? It seems like these two things are so different. And one of the things that I discovered was that when I started doing research, that it's actually very similar to entrepreneurship in three ways. But let me, before I go into that, kind of ask you guys, for anyone here, how do you define research? What do you think research is? I'm curious, any member of business CASA.
What I feel is that it's delving deeper into a topic and, answering questions as to why this occurs or why that occurs, or as to why any phenomena occurs related to that field, that particular section.
I love that. So it's something about discovering something new. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's what I mean.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. Anyone else? Anything I think would have a really good idea? Any other ideas?
Simple terms, I would like to say gaining knowledge on something that is discovered and you want to gain knowledge about it, or something which is not yet discovered and you are trying to give the world more knowledge about it.
Okay, interesting.
By researches and analytics and
all. So something about not yet discovered. So say more. Is that so? No one's ever discovered it before. Is that right? Or what about it? What about that knowledge? What's the difference between, like, say, regular learning and research? Ashma, that's you.
We don't delve deeper. In the normal learning, we often confine ourselves to a specific strata of knowledge. But then, when we do research, we delve deeper into the topic and ask questions as to why a phenomena occurs.
I'd like to add on to what Uddhav was just saying. So when we are learning, when we are in a classroom, for example, then our scope, our rationale to studying something, to understanding something is limited. But when we research, we don't limit ourselves to one specific rationale. We research with a specific mindset, with this very mindset of opening ourselves to a wider scope, to two or maybe three rationales, so that we can compare perspectives and therefore make our hypothesis better.
Interesting. So Harshal, if I have it right, part of research is about being okay about not knowing, being like, okay, there might be a few different ways that this goes. I don't know. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. Because if you know everything, then there's no point of doing research.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And that goes back to kind of Uddhav and Ashman's point about creating something new. But I think what you're adding is distinct and useful, which is saying research is about kind of suspending belief in something. Being like, okay, there's something I don't know. How can I then go and try to get at it? Anyone else? Any other ideas? What is research? Arushi, Nehal, Keshav, Pavish?
Basically, what I think research is like gaining knowledge about something. Like you need to know more about something you do in research. You need to see how it originated, like how it's like prevalent today, what are its roots, so that we can go deeper into it and enhance our knowledge about it.
Got it. So going deeper into it. Okay, love it. So and there's also something about depth. I think that's right, Keshav, about depth. So let me guys offer to you how I have seen research defined kind of externally, and then how I define it, and how we define it at Lumiere. So people often, here's one definition that I found. So research is the systematic investigation into and study materials and sources to establish facts and reach new conclusions. So I think you guys like nailed it. So it's like there's something about like truth going on. It's like established facts and it's systematic. This is a piece where it's like research is not just you talking to like three people and being like, Uddhav, like, how do I make money? And you're like, dude, invest in Dogecoin. And I'm like, are you sure? And you're like, it's going to be great. I'm like, okay, like, Ashman, should I do it? And you're gonna be like, yes. And then I'm like, okay, that's the right thing. I should invest in Dogecoin. Like, that's not research. That's kind of me asking for opinions of people. Research is a much more systematic investigation, trying to get at that truth. But I think research is actually even more simply defined as learning under uncertainty. So what that means is when you're doing research, you're trying to figure out something that either hasn't been figured out before, or it's a question that's never even been asked before. So and the difference between this and what you learn in a test, like, I love taking tests. Like, tests are great. I'm sure you guys are all great at taking tests. But the difference between that and research is that in a test, like, there's a right answer that someone out there knows, like, you're doing your boards, someone comes back to you and you're like, dude, you got this question wrong. With research, you're the person who has to figure out, did I get this question wrong, right? To the point of Harshal, it's about exploring these different options and then choosing one. So this is all research. And so I define research as learning under uncertainty. But let me talk about how I think that's actually quite similar to entrepreneurship. So I actually define entrepreneurship as being almost identical to research, or there's a term that I use called isomorphic. Isomorphic means, let me write it for you guys. I don't know if you guys have heard the term before. Isomorphic means these two things are similar in their structure, but different in their content. So similar in their structure, but different in their content. For example, two tests that have like the same structure might be called isomorphic because of the same form, like morph meaning form, but different in their content. So I think entrepreneurship and research are isomorphic because they have these three similar traits. The one trait is that you're creating something new. So whereas I call research learning under uncertainty, entrepreneurship is about creating under uncertainty. So you have no idea how you guys are going to be, what you're going to be creating, whether or not people actually want it. So maybe similar to you guys, how would you guys define entrepreneurship before I go forward? Does anyone have any definitions of entrepreneurship?
So one of the perfect examples that I feel of an epitome of entrepreneurship, I would call it, would be Steve Jobs. So for example, he had explored the field of computing, and he delved deeper into why people do some actions, and then he combined the monitor with the keyboard, and it became a revolution. It sparked the revolution, and it sparked people to go even deeper, and there were many companies later on. So he started an idea. It's basically research. He did his part, his research, and then people developed that idea further, and there were developments happening.
Yeah, okay, great. So he's like developing something new. I love that. Anyone else? What is entrepreneurship?
I would like to define entrepreneurship in a very fairy tale way. So this is like a you can say like some perspective of mine, not the entire one, but that's how I would reach to the wholesome meaning of entrepreneurship. So I'd say that entrepreneurship is where an entrepreneur starts, like, makes his own kingdom. Every sector of entrepreneurship is a kingdom of a king or a queen. Like, everybody is making their own world by when they become entrepreneurs, when they make a new product, when they are giving something to the society, to the community.
Interesting. So entrepreneurship is about kind of claiming your stake in society. Okay, I like that. Anyone else? Entrepreneurship. How would you define entrepreneurship?
I feel entrepreneurship in its essence is basically someone who sets up a business. That's the idea of being an entrepreneur. Someone who sets up a business, who starts a new business venture. And entrepreneurs, several times they have a new idea, or maybe they take on something that's already happening and they enhance it.
Got it. So something new. So something a little bit about newness, but it's not 100% new necessarily. You might be enhancing it or applying it into a new situation. Is that right, Aryan? Great.
Yeah.
Stephen, I just have one question for you.
Please.
So basically, personally, I asked this question to many people. Do you agree that a businessman is different from an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I do think those are different. Having worked at McKinsey, which is like the super famous consulting firm, right? Like that's like McKinsey's often told like the people who whisper in the ears of CEOs. So like that's the businessman. I certainly think it's quite different because the oh my God, that's so cute. A entrepreneur is trying to create something new. right? And it may be something that's already been created before. To Aryan's point, like you're developing something that is not necessarily entirely unique to the world, but could be unique to the location that you're doing it in. Whereas a businessman is trying to usually add value, like make improvements to a system that already exists. So a businessman certainly can be an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is almost always a businessman, but they're not one and the same. Like I don't think that someone who's a analyst at McKinsey, which is what I was, I wouldn't call myself an entrepreneur. I'd be kind of a total douchebag if I told people I was an entrepreneur when I was working at McKinsey, because I just wasn't, like that's the reality. But I certainly think I was maybe considered a business person. Does that make sense?
I have a question.
Harshal, go ahead. Yeah.
I want to know where, I don't know how to frame it, but it's like, does the process of if I own a business, so does it necessarily involve that aspect of research? Like, okay, market research is a totally separate thing. I consider it separate. Market research is solely based on earning revenue, making profit, and just selling the product out there. But what I want to know is when we research, like proper research, like how we research for a research paper, where does that element come when you're in the process of planning, or you are executing your business, or you're growing, whenever in that whole cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so intimately tied. So, and here's how I define the two. So research I define as learning under uncertainty. Entrepreneurship I define as doing under uncertainty or creating under uncertainty. But the question is, how do you know what to create? Right? How do you know what to create that's going to be valuable? And so I'll give you an example. Like, let's say you're running a company. Harshal, for you, what's an example of a company that you would like to start one day?
I'd say Goldman Sachs.
You want to start Goldman Sachs? Wow, impressive. So go back in time like 100 years and then start Goldman Sachs. So let's say you want to start a bank, for example, right? Now, let's say that, and I'll give you an example of a startup bank, Mercury, which is a bank I really like, which is a startup bank that essentially is servicing online startups or online small businesses. Okay. So for them, when they're thinking about what's the next thing I want to launch, so I already have this group of people who use my product, what's the next thing I want to launch? That's where research really comes into play, because essentially you're trying to identify what is it that people want, what is it that people need, and how do I rigorously and quickly get at that answer. And so that's a big part of research. So, but the difference here between, let's say, like what does a business school professor do and an entrepreneur do, which is actually a little different, is that a business school professor is obsessed with being correct. Like their whole job is about them being correct. So they want to make sure their research is like very rigorous, very robust. An entrepreneur is obsessed about getting meaning quickly and making decisions. So for them, they're going to do things that make them learn as quickly as possible. They don't need to always be correct, but because they value their time more and their speed, but they're still learning. So both of these groups are learning in order to succeed. A researcher wants to be as correct as quickly as possible. An entrepreneur wants to learn and get just enough for them to make a decision as quickly as possible. But for both of them, they're doing research, and they're just doing slightly different forms of that same research. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, I love it. So throw any more questions. I'm going to say 2 more points on the connection between research and entrepreneurship, and then I'll just pass to you guys for any questions. And then we'll kind of wrap up with anything else. So the second thing I want to say is really similar between being a researcher, being an entrepreneur, is that you get to be your own boss. I think Harshal, you gave the definition of being like the king of your own kingdom or the queen of your own queendom. When you're a researcher, for example, my dad's a professor, like he has no boss. He's all he's doing is just creating his own small kingdom of knowledge that he's the one who has created for the world. Whenever people think about, this form of, in his case, it's around, it could be on gender, entrepreneurship, around people making, job seeking, whatever it is, people will think of, my dad, for example. Whereas an entrepreneur, you're creating your own kingdom of like a product, a system of people doing work, and you're owning that that system itself. In both cases, you control your time, you control what you do, and you are your own boss. A researcher and entrepreneur are, again, very similar, though seemingly like as different as possible, because they're both their own boss. And then I will say the final piece that's very similar between the two of them is that both of what they're doing is actually really high risk. So people often think about entrepreneurs as being really high risk because, you know, you're putting in money, you don't know if it's going to work, maybe like you blow up, people think you're a failure, whatever it is. And that certainly is the case that there's risk associated with entrepreneurship, though I think it's actually reduced over time as entrepreneurship seems cool now. And you know, people give you money and venture capitalists in order to start up. So it's a little bit less risky. But the same thing is true for a researcher. Like you can spend 2-3 years on an individual project and it might totally fail. And if it fails, then you're like, you're screwed. You're like, no, like I spent all this time and yet I'm stuck with nothing. And so it's the exact same situation of the entrepreneur and the researcher. And so as you think about doing research, this is one of the things like I'm really passionate about, you know, for the organization I run, Lumiere, which is a product of both research and entrepreneurship, because my co-founder and I created it, and he was my classmate at Harvard from Chennai, but also involves a lot of research because we care so much about research, is that we think when students do research, they're actually training themselves in some of the skills, like learning in ambiguous situations, which are going to make them successful, whether they become researchers or entrepreneurs or doing anything in business. Because being able to learn in ambiguous situation, that skill set, which is so hard to get, is going to make you so successful. So anyways, that's all I wanted to say about entrepreneurship and research. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, thoughts, anything about you know my experience or anything I can help share, would love to learn, but also would love to hear any reactions you guys might have to that.
I had this question like since a long time. So basically what I believe is a bit different from the conventional mindset of a person that money doesn't buy happiness. What I believe is money does buy happiness to a certain extent, but not all of it. So do you agree to the statement that money does buy happiness to a certain extent, if not all the happiness?
So there's a ton of research on money and happiness. I'm actually send you guys, there's a great book on, so this is funny because that question is actually a research question, you know, what you're asking. And there's a great TED talk by a researcher at Harvard by this guy, Mike Norton, who's like just such a legend.
You could possibly write a research paper on this topic if I want to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's like hundreds of research papers on this topic, and this is like such a good area of research. I just linked a TED talk by Mike Norton on this topic. And so, you know, I'm not a researcher in happiness or money, but from what I understand, this is like the main effects of like the main 3 findings in the research that looks at money and happiness. So the first finding is that money certainly can reduce stress. So money up to a certain point allows you to not be stressed in your day-to-day. And so, you know, before you are up to that point of like not worrying every day about having enough to eat or, you know, being able to pay for your kids' education, whatever it is, having more money reduces more stress, which makes you happier. For, you know, different in different countries, that's at different levels of income, but that's one. The second is that how you spend money really matters. So if you spend money on other people, you feel really happy. Actually, there's this great experiment where two sets of people were given $5. For one set, they said, go spend those $5 on yourself. And for the other set of people, they said, go spend those $5 on someone else. And at the end of the day, they asked, you know, how happy are you? How satisfied do you feel with your life? And people that spent those $5 on themselves reported essentially being at the exact same level they were before. But people who spend that money on other people, again, it's kind of pro-social ways, what it's called, being good to other people, they experience being a higher level of happiness. So that's a way you can spend money. And the third is whether or not you created that money or you didn't earn that money. So self-made millionaires, for example, are on average happier than people who just inherited millions of dollars because they feel like, I created this, I did this. So there's a sense of pride attached to their wealth, a sense of ownership. Where people who inherit wealth don't have that same sense of pride attached to it. Does that make sense? So those are some quick findings on money and happiness. Certainly money matters, but it's not everything for happiness.
Those are like really nice insights. Like they were fresh perspectives for me as well.
Yeah.
Can I ask the next question as well?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, Stephen, we have a question from our audience, and Shaurya Sinha has asked you a question. How does your Harvard network help you in your everyday life, in your routine?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's a good question in general. I think like, how does your network affect your everyday life? I think Harvard's almost like just as one specific instance of a network. The answer is in many ways, but let me give two big ways. I'll call it peer effect, and I'll call it friendship. The second one pretty easy. The peer effect one is really important. Essentially, the most important factor, one of the most important factors of what you'll end up doing with your life is the people around you and what they think is cool. You know, like at the end of the day, it's like, what do my friends and what does my family, but really my peers, what do my peers think is like awesome or not awesome? And there's like this ethos that exists out there that like we should all be, you know, individuals, choose what is our passion. But if you look at all the research on, you know, how humans make decisions, we make decisions based upon our external environmental cues. So we essentially look around at our peers, people we consider similar to us. We say, what are they doing? Okay, as a result, how should I be spending my time? How should I be allocating my time? So for me, you know, after this business casa call in like 25 minutes, I'm going to get on a call with my college roommate and we work out together 3 times a week over Zoom. It's like super nerdy. It's like 2 like white dudes like doing push-ups together. It's like, it's really embarrassing. But we're talking, right? And he's running this amazing startup in New York City. And I talked to him before I started Lumiere, and I started feeling like, dude, if my roommate Greg can do a startup, maybe I should be doing a startup, right? So I think this reality of your network influences the type of decisions that you make. So if you go to IIT, maybe you're like, oh, maybe I should be working at Google, you know, or whatever. If you are working at Google, or maybe I should drop out and create like a tech company, or like whatever it is. The second is that your network also provides you, like, talk about happiness, like that's the most important factor in your happiness is your network. And especially when you're younger, the breadth of your network of people that you have connection with is super important. So what you guys are doing with Business Casa is like amazing and so important, because you guys likely, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, wouldn't be coming together in this way, learning from each other, if it were not for this organization. And so I think it's incredibly important what you're doing, and make sure to spend time learning about each other and recognizing that this club also has a purpose of learning and, you know, developing relationships with one another. And so I think for me, like my happiness comes from, you know, the network of my friends, whether it's my high school friends or my college friends or my friends from work. So those are 2 big influences of network. Yeah.
We have another question from Anish Sami. He's asking like, what are the tips for concise as well as comprehensive research?
What was the first word? Sorry, something incomprehensive.
Tips for concise as well as comprehensive research.
Concise. Do you know? You probably don't know what she means by concise, because you're reading the question. So, I think, let me say what I think is a really common failure in research for high school students. And I think this will get at for high school students. The biggest mistake I see is that students try to answer too big of a question. And it's kind of like the issue of like when you're creating a company and you're like, your first thing you do is you're like, okay, I'm going to create like this massive chain, and we're going to have chains. We're going to be like Mumbai, we're going to be in Pune, we're going to be in Kolkata, like then we're going to be in Sri Lanka, and then we're going to have like a China branch, and like we're going to do like smoothies, but we're also going to do like, you know, whatever this other food, like these delicious rare forms of roti or whatever, like I don't know what it is. And you think way too broadly, and then like you get nothing done because you have no identity. You have nothing that's specific. You haven't found your niche. Same thing is with research. Like even would have for you, you're like, I'm really interested in how money and happiness connect, but that's a massive question. Like you'd have to go specific. Like, what is it about money and happiness? Is it for high school students? Like, is it about how they spend the money or how they get the money? Is it about like, what about when people look at the money? So like you have to go really, really specific. And when you go specific, you're able to then create something new for the world. And the same is true for entrepreneurship. When you're creating a problem, you really want to pick something that's unique and distinctive that you can then build upon.
So like, could you suggest a specific research topic which I could maybe delve into deeper?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the nice thing about the social science is that you can use your own experience. So for you, as opposed to saying the connection between money and happiness, you might say, I'm interested in the connection of extra money used by high school students and how high school students use their money to then how that influences their happiness. So focusing on how high school students use their extra money, or focusing on, how much money they get, for example, how that influences, let's say, their life satisfaction, for example, or something like that. So go more specific, like who is it? What are they doing? What are you going to measure? How are you going to measure it? That would be what I would, that would be an example of how you can get more specific.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, so the next question is from our audience, Harshada Vijay. One key takeaway as an analytics fellow in McKinsey and Company.
Yeah, one key takeaway when I was at McKinsey.
Yeah, like you can share multiple ones.
Yeah, totally. I'm just trying to think about what most. I think let me say one of the things I learned from McKinsey that I found useful is creating structure when you communicate is as much about you understanding something as helping someone else understand something. And so in McKinsey, when you are applying to get into McKinsey, it's really famous for doing a case method. This is true for like all consulting companies. McKinsey just happens to be, one of these companies. And in the case part of the interview, you're going to be asked this like really big question. Like, for example, how are you going to start a new type of restaurant in Pune, because you want to open a new chain there. And so when you're trying to answer that question, being really structured about how you answer it, but then also how you communicate it. So one of the things that McKinsey does, which is like kind of a joke inside McKinsey, but also one of my mentors HBS did, is always answering in threes. So always being like, there's three main reasons for this. And when you give three, for example, it's very clear. People are like, oh, okay, there's three. Let me write them down. Like, for example, I said there's three ways that entrepreneurs and research people are similar. And then Harshal's like, okay, sweet, I'm going to write these down, right, in the chat. So like you remember it. Because three is just enough for someone to remember, but it's also not so small that it feels like you haven't thought at all about it. So at McKinsey, you often say, I have three reasons for this. And then you don't even know what your third reason is. And you're still like scrambling to try to think through it. But by doing that, you force yourself to create structure. So for example, in this case, I gave you guys a structure of three reasons why I think entrepreneurs and researchers are similar, because they're both doing something new. They're your own boss, and they're all high risk, for example. And so that was something at McKinsey that I found really kind of obvious in retrospect, but really cool. And so when you're around people who are really good at that, I think it's a very valuable thing to apply in your own life and learn from. Vash, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to ask that how much did your environment and your surroundings, like the people, and how much did they affect your research on whatever you were doing back in those days?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot. For like one of the topics that I was really interested in when I applied to PhD programs was around immigrant entrepreneurs. So how do people who move to a new country, like it's so cool in Silicon Valley, like so many of the CEOs now are like Indian immigrants. Like that's ridiculous. I think it's just like so wild. Like how did that happen? And I'm just really curious about that. So why is it that you have these foreigners who go to a new place and they're able to succeed not only in kind of climbing up the ranks, but also in creating something new. And so, and that research interest came to me because I lived a lot of my life outside of the US. I lived in Singapore and Hong Kong and Taiwan as a kid. And then after I graduated from college, I lived in Vietnam. And I was always curious about meeting these kind of random people who are like kind of like me, who are foreigners in those places, who had created companies. And I was like, dude, how did you do that? Like, you created this like crazy, I remember speaking to someone who created this, like one of the biggest investment funds in Vietnam. And he's like this random British guy. And I was like, how did that happen? That's so random. And he spoke fluent Vietnamese, and he is just like very well known, and the government in Vietnam loves him. And I was like, that's really weird. Like, it's really weird to me that people can do that. So that definitely influenced my research interest. So especially in the social sciences, and to some extent in the humanities as well, your surroundings are a great source of your research questions. And research is all about like essentially saying like, oh, that's kind of weird. Like, why did that happen? And when you find something weird, researching it is usually a great thing, because you'll learn a lot and you'll explore something usually other people find weird and interesting.
Thank you.
Another question. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. No, I'm just curious for you guys, as you all think about, business, what are some questions on your mind? Like, if you had like a year to just research something and you're like, that's kind of interesting, or that's kind of weird in business, what would it be? I'm just curious for you all.
Anyone else wants to answer first? Can I go?
Go ahead. After that, I'll...
Yeah. So I was actually interested on after watching the presidential debate between Biden and Trump. Biden mentioned that the shape of recovery post-pandemic could be K-shaped recovery, and that was something which was new and which was pretty fascinating. So I tried researching towards that, but one of my mentors, they said that it is still very broad as a concept, because because I told them that, okay, I want to do research under macroeconomics, but they still asked me to specify it. So this is like particularly, I don't think if it's restricted only to business, but it is somewhere common in that field. So I was thinking that post-pandemic, what is going to be the shape of recovery?
Interesting. Cool. I love it. What about you?
So basically the biggest motivator that, inspires me to go in business, I won't lie, but it's money, first of all. Because like I'd always dreamt of, being this crazy rich guy and then having all those buildings and mansions. So that's the biggest motivator. And secondly, it's also about, seeing people around you and being able to help them. For example, you might have heard of Ratan Tata. Have you heard of him?
Say again?
Ratan Tata.
Yes, of course.
So that guy, he's like a philanthropist, and he has, helped many people because he was able to help them. Like, if you don't have money, how will you go and help other people? So that's basically another concept, that only if you have money, you'll be able to help the other people. So like helping people and being rich yourself.
Got it. And that's kind of your own interest in business. Yeah. What about Arushi and Nehal? I haven't heard from you guys. Is there anything in particular that you guys are interested in within business, or any kind of specific questions that you find interesting? This is called like the HBS cold call, when you just call on someone. Oh, Arushi just like totally. Nehal, I guess you have to go then.
I haven't really thought of something as such yet, but I mean, a lot of things seem very interesting to me. I'm not that much into research yet, but I will get into it pretty soon. Not right now.
That's great, but it sounds like you've broad interest in business, and so you're now like kind of figuring out what is it about business. That's great. Arushi, did you want to go, or do you want to pass? Oh, good. Ashmit, go ahead.
No, just like the audience had one question.
Please.
Harnoor Singh, how do you organize your work zone?
How do I organize, like, physical work zone?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Well, I currently am, I make sure to always have Lord Ganesh behind me, because he motivates me to work. No, I mean, for me, I actually, I'm actually not that organized physically. Like the stuff around me is kind of messy. Like I don't think it's like I have my Hindi textbook right here. You know, like I'm learning Hindi, so it's like my Hindi textbook. I have like a random set of stuff over here. So to me, it's not about physical space, but what I really am very kind of obsessed with is about organization of my time. And so I started when I was about 16, 17, where I started keeping track of, I started just using a calendar, essentially keeping track of everything I was doing and put it on the calendar. And so, you know, in 15 minutes, for example, I'll have to jump off because my college roommate and I are going to go work out together. You know, it's like this habit that we have built in. And I have very clear habits. So I have like, and it's on my calendar. So every day I'm going to have these meetings with my team members in Lumiere. I have things booked out weeks in advance. And so I focus very little on organizing my physical life because it doesn't, to me, just my personality, like if there's a little bit of clutter around me, it doesn't really matter. But I spend a ton of time organizing my time, because how you spend your time is how you grow, how you learn, what you focus on. And so that's how I spend that's what I focus on organizing. If I had to choose the two, I always choose time.
So can we sum up that time management is the most important aspect of your life to achieve anything?
Yeah, is it the most important aspect to your life? I think you might be summarizing like a bit beyond my statement, but I certainly think it's important. I mean, I think you're right in saying that time management is important. But life is about, in my mind, life is about this interlaying set of strategic and tactical questions. Just like in business, you often hear about strategy, you often hear about like tactics. So strategy is like, what do I want to do? It's like, maybe I want to study computer science because I want to become an engineer. Another strategy might be like, hey, maybe I want to study econ. That's like a big decision in your life. A tactic is like, okay, I've got a test in like 2 weeks. How do I approach this test? And so I think time management becomes super important at the tactical level. But if you don't make the right strategic decisions, then you're kind of screwed. Like you could become the most time effective barista at, you know, and you'll only ever be able to make like 20 cups of coffee in an hour or something, or like 100 cups of coffee an hour, because you've chosen to be a barista, for example. And so that was a strategic choice. But if your goal is to make 1 million cups of coffee, you wouldn't become a barista, you become a coffee shop owner, you know? Does that make sense? So time management is certainly important, but it's has to be paired with really good high-level decisions about your life.
So, like, how was the feeling when Hillary Clinton quoted one of your journals, I guess?
What? 1 second.
Yeah. So, like, how was the feeling when Hillary Clinton quoted one of your Harvard Business Review articles? I'm not wrong.
That was crazy. Well, I mean, I wasn't there, so I had no idea. But until later, no, it was yeah, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. I think like in my mind, one of the most important things, this is not your question, but like this is related. One of the most important things I learned at Harvard is that even the most like famous people are just people who kind of live like lame lives. Like they're just boring people, you know, who just by like luck primarily, but and some skill are like in these crazy positions of power. And but they're just like really normal. And so, you know, Hillary Clinton is also just like randomly reading like the New York Times, and she's like, oh, that's kind of cool, maybe I'll mention this in her speech. It's like, you know, or maybe her speechwriter is just like reading a random thing. It's like, that's kind of cool. And so, you know, at the time I was like super stoked, but then I realized like, oh, she probably just like was like flicking through like Instagram, the equivalent or whatever. And it's like, oh, this is interesting. So, you know, it certainly was cool, but the more important takeaway for me was like, yeah, these are just normal people who are in many ways just no different than us in terms of how they get information. And I think that should be empowering to all of us to realize that the most powerful people on earth have some access to things that we don't have access to, but it's becoming more and more equal. So I think this is a good example of it, actually.
Yeah, that's great.
Any more questions, guys? Anything else on your mind? If not, I can share a little bit about Lumiere, and then I have to go, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, I think you can continue with Lumiere.
Okay, so guys, I'll just share like 2 minutes about like my current project, which is Lumiere, and the whole goal of Lumiere is that if you guys want to do research, then we help you do research with researchers from like the world's best universities, so places like Harvard. The company is founded by Harvard alums, created for people who are ambitious about doing research, about getting to their next step, whether it's college, grad school, job, etc. And so if you guys are interested in research in like economics, psychology, business, and entrepreneurship, then we help you in that process. And just go quickly through this. And you can kind of see the types of students that do it are these like really ambitious students, like Asta, for example, just got into Cornell. She's incredible. And they're students who, who for themselves, they want to showcase how they are creating something new. And this is something that can be quite valuable for them as they think about like their college applications, for example. And so if you are interested, the program is about 12 weeks long. It's a selective program. You need to apply into it. And for students who want to do research, I would certainly encourage applying. Over the course of the program, you work one-on-one with someone like myself or my co-founder Dhruva, who's a researcher at one of these top institutions. Place people like Caitlin, who's graduated from Harvard recently, or Cody, who's at Oxford, or Bhargav, who's an econ PhD at Columbia, who's also just like a legend of a dude. He's so nice. And they help you, guide you in doing research, often for the first time. So this is the individual research program. The whole goal is for you to write that research paper. And then we have a longer program as well, where we help you then take that research paper and then publish it in a selective competition or selective research journal for students. Application deadline is the April 30th. We have a round 2 application deadline if you're interested. And then you can always look at our website, which is like lumiere-education.com. So if you're interested in doing research, if you want to create something while you're in high school that is going to help you stand out for kind of your next steps, I certainly encourage you to apply. So, okay, that's it. That's my only little pitch for Lumiere, which is something I love in my own kind of entrepreneurial research project right now. Great. Cool.
So did Avanti in any way inspire you to do this or something?
Did Avanti inspire me?
Yeah. Is she there?
To do what? No, Avanti. I mean, I think she's on the phone. Inspired me to do this company. Certainly, Avanti is a reason that I am in India. So certainly she has a massive influence in my life in that way. So yeah, Avanti's the best. She's the legend. Yeah. Do all of you guys watch your videos? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I watched the videos. Actually, the first video that I watched was how to get into Harvard, because like I just wanted to know the stats and all that stuff. So
yeah, totally. Amazing. Very cool. Well, awesome. Well, hey guys, thank you so much for having me. I should go probably like in a minute or two.
Yeah. So just Harshal, just give the concluding.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone, once again. And at this point, we all know, we had, thanks to Mr. Turban here, we've had a wonderful break from the hustle, because at this point, both me and my team, we are in a state of flux, because we are busy with, because our mind state is actually really tensed with our college applications, SATs, and everything, and admissions. We're really stressed. So this was a cup of tea time. There was a short break. I personally really enjoyed it. I asked my questions. I hope the audience engaged quite well too. And I can only thank Mr. Turban to take out time for us out of his busy schedule and answer so meticulously and concisely to our questions. And the 3 tips that I could infer from the similarities between a researcher and an entrepreneur were The first one was creating something new, that both a researcher and an entrepreneur create something new. Second is that both of them get to be their own boss. And the third one was that both researching and entrepreneurship involves high risk. And these three things were the key takeaways from Mr. Turban's speech over here and today's discussion at Business Casa. So it has been a really wonderful afternoon. And I'd only like to thank Mr. Turban more because we all were honored to have you here.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you guys. I'm impressed with what you're doing. It's very important. It's clearly something that's going to change the direction of your all's lives. And so keep doing it. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.